Hello YouTube, welcome to this live rendition of a video on Erik Karlsson. Now, you know I normally pre-record things, pre-produce things here on the channel. This one's going to be a little bit different because I want to get it out there. I want to cut down on some production time. But as I do this video, just to let you know, I will not really be reacting to the live chat, but you can put your comments down below and I will interact with those later. All right, so 6 points to make here on Erik Karlsson. I'll begin with number one here, and this is the obvious personal statement. I hate singling out players in any sport. I hate isolating on one individual in a team sport situation. I've got the golden rule where I'll never say anything about a player that I wouldn't also say to them. I wouldn't say it on television. I wouldn't say it here on YouTube or social media. So, this is not going to be a rip session. If that's what you're tuning in for, if that's what you're expecting in the next, 10 minutes, that's not exactly what's going to happen here. I am intending to put together all the pieces, try and get a bigger picture perspective on nuances, big things. I'm trying to connect everything as much as we can about Erik Karlsson's third season here in San Jose. And I should also throw out the obvious here. I don't have the background to be too critical. Never played in the NHL, never even played any competitive level of professional sport, let alone hockey. I've never won a Norris Trophy or two, and I would suspect that most of you are in that same category. So, yes, we're all spectators. Yes, we all have opinions, but I think it's important to put into perspective here when we are talking about somebody in an analytical fashion. That's what it is, not trying to crush anybody here. So that's point number one. And let me close it out actually with this. Every interaction I've had with Erik Karlsson since he came over from Ottawa has been good. Now, it has been limited interactions. We're not hanging out nor talking all the time, but every time I've had the opportunity for personal connections, nothing but good things to say. And I do want to throw that in there as we again look at the entire picture of Erik Karlsson in San Jose. So all of that is number one. Number two, the reason I feel inclined to discuss this and put this out here and have this conversation is because it's become so apparent to me that he is the most discussed player, whether it's social media, whether it's doing YouTube Q&As. It's what fans want to talk about, and that is the nature of the business that I'm in. And so I do feel like I want to give this opportunity. I wanted to have some time to put this together, and respond to it and respond to what people are talking about. I would also say this for point number two. He's a conversation piece because he did sign the biggest contract in team history in terms of value and in duration. And that's not always fair. It is fair in a sense of the salary cap, and there's a hard cap in the NHL. And it all goes into strategy and success of a franchise, short and long term. But on a personal level, again, to whom much is given, much is expected. I do understand the nature of that. But sometimes with those big level contracts, expectations can also get ridiculous. You can turn your vision of a person from that into being a machine. And they're not a machine. And they have setbacks and they have issues and things pop up. And not all contracts play out how you thought they would. So my point being here, I do understand the flip side of why people want to discuss this, why they are narrowing in oftentimes on EK65. Point number three is this 2021 season to date. And a season like no other, let's be very honest about that, in the way that it started, the layoff of 10 months for the Sharks before this season, quick training camp, more than a month on the road, like 45 days to begin the season away from family in San Jose. So all that included here, 20 games the team has played. He's been a part of 16. He sat out 4 with the groin injury. 5 points, 1 goal, 4 apples, and a -3 rating. And I think we could look at those stats, and that's what I'm pretty much going to stick to here in a lot of this analysis, are statistics, also some of the eye test. But I think when you look at the offensive side, which we'll begin with first, there is some frustration there in a player who's an offensive defenseman And the team in general hasn't been on a scoring tear this season. So obviously his stats are connected to that. But you can certainly see that that is an observation. The points, the goals, all those offensive totals are low. But I feel like the real thing, the real eye test, the frustration factor would come from actually how he's been involved with his team defensively. And team defense is a whole separate issue. This is not unique. This is not unique to Erik Karlsson. This is not even unique to San Jose's defensemen or their goalies or even their forwards. It's an entire team issue of defense that has been a negative trend over the last several seasons. But I think as you evaluate Erik Karlsson this season, and we'll talk injury in just a second and how that has or hasn't played a factor, it's not so much the offensive production. It's almost like baseball. I use a lot of baseball analogies for whatever reason lately, maybe the season because the season's coming up. But if you looked at Erik Karlsson and it was a player who at the plate offensively was struggling, you know those offensive ruts are going to happen and for sustained periods of time occasionally. But your defense out in the field can always be solid and shouldn't be susceptible to those same high and low points, those streaky nature points. So that is probably the bigger thing I've noticed this year. You could point out all his offensive numbers and metrics and maybe not as creative enough. I know the word creativity was talked about in what he was lacking before the injury for the team, but I think it's been more of the defensive responsibilities to me that stand out in terms of this season. Now, point number 4 is the groin injury/injuries. Now, he says that what happened in 2019, and I think that was late January when he suffered the first major one that had him sitting out a month. He tried to come back a little bit too early, re-injured it, ended up sitting out until the rest of the season. And I'll break down his 2018-2019 campaign in just a second, his first season with San Jose. But that first groin injury from 2 years ago, he says is totally separate to what he's been dealing with this year. And also last year, right, he had the broken thumb. So I do understand that every single year there has been something to worry about. The first year, it kept him out more than a month. The playoffs were in question, but he actually had a pretty good playoffs, as I'll spell out here in a second. Last year, broken thumb. What are you going to do? We saw it happen. We know exactly when and where it happened. But what's happening here in 2021, I think the injury makes it's unfortunate because it clouds the whole situation. It clouds the whole issue of, all right, how much was this hindering him at the start of this year? I mean, he did say near the end of training camp, everything was a go, 100% healthy, no issues to report. But what happens if it was game 2? All of a sudden this pops up. And then the next dozen games, he's trying to play through something that inhibits him. And I just want to put this out there. I mean, whatever you do for a career, and think of something hindering you that you just couldn't do your job, and you know you're not the same, and your coworkers know you're not the same, your boss knows you're not the same, but your customers, they might see it, but you can't tell them why. And that's a part of hockey culture that it's frustrating. It's maddening. As somebody who covers the sport, analyzes the games, breaks things down, you know, in other sports, there's a little bit more transparency. You know when somebody's dealing with something, they'll tell you more about it, specifically what it is. There's a lot more clarity. But in hockey, it's secret. It's hush-hush. And so that, you know, it makes an injury for him, a different groin injury, makes it really cloudy. Like earlier this season, when did it start? Is it still going on? I will say that in his last couple games since coming back, he's looked a lot more mobile. And he was only out less than 2 weeks. So did he get right in less than 2 weeks? Was it something that just needed a quick recovery? Is there more to this? Only he and the doctors and the team and the medical staff know. And in hockey, you're not obligated to share that information. So what I'm saying is the groin injury and what happens next, what's been happening, it's all cloudy just because of protocol and what can and won't be shared. Now, he has not had a normal season with the Sharks, realistically, since his first. Last year, the league got shut down. He had broke his hand about 2 or 3 weeks prior. This season, not traditional by any means. So the first season in San Jose, and this is after all those years with Ottawa, total change of scenery, comes to the Sharks, and it was a slow start. It took him until game 21 of the 2018-2019 season, 21 games to get his first goal. Had a couple assists before that, but it was a slow start. We talked a lot about acclimation, new scenery, fitting in. After that, there was a sequence between December and January of end of 18, beginning of 19. He was red hot. 14 games, 25 points, almost 2 points a night. Was a plus 16 during that stretch. That took him through mid-January. Mid to late January of 2019, has that major groin injury. To the point where in that one Boston game where he just keeled over, could barely make it back to the bench, and that was when he was trying to come back. And there was the team was pushing to the playoffs. Ultimately, they made it, and ultimately I'll talk about his playoffs, but wanted and needed to use him. He was still trying to do everything possible to make this first impression good. And I give him a lot of credit because he came back like the last game of the regular season, I want to say, game 82. Was it a game against the Avs? Just played. All we cared about was, shake the rust off and play a game before the playoffs, so long as you're right. And then in the playoffs, he was in 19 games, 16 points. Remember that these are the playoffs where it was Las Vegas in round one, right? The famous or infamous, if you're from Nevada, Game 7. Colorado in round 2, and then St. Louis is where it ended in round 3. But he had a really good playoffs. He looked stronger as the playoffs went on. So his first season was the only normal one, and even that one was segmented in really high highs, kind of low, high, low, high. So we haven't really had an injury-free, normal hockey season for Erik Karlsson yet in San Jose. All right, and then the last point I want to make here, number 6, spelled all this out. What comes next? Where do we go from here? I'll be honest, I had a lot of faith and hope in EK65. I really thought that this season for him starting off, I made this bold prediction on NBCSports.com that he would be and could be a point-per-game player for the Sharks here in 2021. And, if healthy and if, like other times in his career, we've seen him, and so long as the team also had a respectable start, which is also a question. I mean, I say respectable, good or bad, all things considered, it's probably more in the middle than it is good. And I could think of far worse, so I don't think it's bad. But I think not being a point-per-game player, not even close to it. 5 points in 16 games, I'm way off the mark. But again, I wasn't throwing that out of nowhere, or I wasn't pulling that out of nowhere. I really felt like this could be that normal-ish season productivity-wise for Erik Karlsson. But I think it all boils down to this. We're quickly approaching the halfway point of 2021. Again, I think he's past whatever he was dealing with. I mean, sure looks like it. But what is the rest of this season going to be about? And I think it has to be for him individually, just establishing his presence, his game all over again. Love to see that he's been shooting more lately. I think the offense is just generally going to come more from that, clearly. Whether he was holding back before due to injury or due to something else. I really think, if healthy, at some point in these final 38 games, to have to bounce back, to have to make your statement, like I said, establish something here in these final 38 games. No matter what happens for the team, postseason or not, establish something else individually. So that does it. Hope you guys can appreciate what I was trying to do here and put all of this together, doing it live, again, like I don't normally do, but just wanted to get that out here. And we'll see you on television tonight. Sharks and Las Vegas this weekend.